Welcome back to Ray's Talk Show. This is your host, Ray Collazo. Thank you so much for joining us. Ray's Talk Show. We're talking about the issues that you're talking about in your community that are impacting our society, and particularly the Latino community. In our perspective, we care about so many things and have an opinion about everything. So we like to have a place for diverse voices to engage in this conversation with no harassment. That's for sure. Respect for everybody. You can listen to Ray's Talk Show anywhere. You can download a podcast. Someone asked me the other day, where can I hear your podcast? I'm like, you can even hear it on YouTube, much less iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio. A lot of you are listening on the Spotify platform. Thank you so much. You can check out Ray's Talk Show anywhere on social media at Ray's Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, everywhere else. As most episodes, I'm here with my intrepid co-host who has his own podcast, our dear friend from the great Northwest, Leo Perales. Leo, welcome back, brother.
Hey, what's going on? Me just over here in Washington, keeping it real. As usual, just trying to watch the calamity and all the destruction down there in D.C. from my vantage.
Yeah, you're thankfully for you, you're a few time zones away. I will actually be in D.C. probably in about 13 hours, but that's another conversation. This may come up at the end of the show, but we do have a bit of there was a little tension here with our sports rivalries, which is going to come to a head on Sunday night. Maybe we'll talk about that during the Hey Ray segment. Leo, let people know where they can find your podcast, The Perales Report.
Yes, you can find me on SoundCloud. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, everywhere. Just type in The Perales Report. Find it on YouTube. Look for my stuff. Just really groundbreaking stuff, kind of underground, top operation I have going over here in Washington in the Tri-Cities area. So look at Perales Report.
On the show, we're definitely going to give people an update in a moment on the GOP tax scam, because it is a scam and it's unfortunately coming to a head in the coming hours. We have to let people know how to raise their voice. And so the latest, I was in Washington on Capitol Hill literally hours ago, and want to give people an update what I'm seeing on the ground there and why we should be very concerned and lift our voices here, even in the 11th hour. Of course, we have to touch base on the ongoing humanitarian crisis on the island of Puerto Rico, of course, affecting millions of American citizens, and has wide implications not only in the island, but electoral politics here in the mainland. And we will, of course, have what's quickly becoming a cult, one of the great cult followings of our time, Hey Ray segment later on the show. But first, Leo, we had an announcement from one of the most well-recognized Latino, really an icon in Latino politics, who had an announcement this week that caused shockwaves amongst our leadership network around the country, and we definitely have to talk about it some.
Yeah, it definitely took me I thought I had to make sure I saw that correctly on the Facebook threads and on the internet. I was like, no, this can't be real. Because honestly, I didn't know that Gutierrez was in office for so long. And as a matter of fact, he did make lots of trips over here to Washington, in my neck of the woods, in the Seattle, in the area, to talk about immigration. So, but yeah, I'll go ahead and put it up for you. Definitely him stepping down, not seeking re-election. Where does the Democratic Party, for one, where's the Democratic Party go from here in regards to Latino representation? And who do you think is going to fill his mantle as the kind of champion of immigrants?
Well, let's take a step back. The first thing I want to say, on a personal level, Congressman Luis Gutierrez, who represents, the 4th Congressional District, Illinois, but essentially the bulk of the Latino community in the Chicago Chicagoland area, is as close to a modern day political hero as I have. I have someone that with some of my early work as a young organizer in Chicago, literally saw, sort of growing up in many respects and having many mutual mentors and allies from Chicago and around the country in this work, and really seeing him being a true champion, and someone who I think particularly his leadership style resonates with Latinos as working people, as immigrants, as people fighting for a better life. And I think as we call him in Puerto Rican Spanish, El Gallito, the little rooster, sort of his spunky style, I think as much as and work ethic, I think resonates as much as anything. People don't, we'll talk about the legacy in a second, but I think it's one of the reasons that people are so shocked and also so sad. On a political level, usually you get some inkling, and I'll be honest. I mean, I think I was just chatting with someone else about this that, not that we're completely shocked, but he kept a real tight lip about it. This was real confidential. I mean, people were generally surprised when he made the announcement. And I think that it's it definitely will leave a void in Congress, but I think it's a challenge, and I think he's very cognizant of it, that we can't let just being an elected official sort of define our leadership. So, I think we've struggled as a Latino leadership community when people have stepped down from running organizations, when they've stepped down from being elected officials, to help people find later in life this second act, if you will. So the fact that he's sort of being very open about the fact he's not going away, he's not going to retire, and actually even speculating about doing much bigger things, I think speaks to, a sort of a call on all of us to support him in his next steps. In terms of where it leaves politics, in particularly Latino political democratic leadership, it's a tremendous void. I mean, you have to think about it this way, Leo, is that there is not one, if there's any Latino leader, with the possible exception of Jorge Ramos on Univision, that is thought of as essentially the de facto leader of the immigrant rights movement, and the sort of clearly the legislative champion for immigration issues, it's Congressman Gutierrez. Now, think about that, and think about the fact that he also, during this time period, over the last 24 years he will have been in Congress doing this run, has also had the same leadership iconic status amongst the progressive Puerto Rican community, not only in the mainland United States, like people like me, but people on the island of Puerto Rico. Of course, this is culminating in getting a lot more attention during this humanitarian crisis post hurricanes. But for decades, he has had the same leadership role as it relates to the Vieques issue, the Culebra issue, the Puerto Rican political prisoner issue, just general human rights issues related to the island and its economic freedom as a colony of the United States. So I'm hard pressed to think of any other current Latino member of Congress of either party who so identified with an issue, and he's identified with two. So this is the kind of work ethic, this is the kind of spirit and the kind of dedication that this man has had, whether you agree with him or not on all issues, that he's had for the Latino community. And on the immigration piece alone, he has essentially had almost a presidential campaign schedule for the last 20 years. I mean, you've seen him in Washington State. He's gone on bus tours. He's gone on all kind of sort of national campaigns, community to community, mobilizing immigrant and Latino communities. So a tremendous legacy and a tremendous challenge for all of us to not only support the congressman in his next steps, but to all do our own part to fill the vacuum.
Yeah, I don't think it's really hit home for many Latinos out there, activists and whatnot. Because I say that because he's been in office for 20-some years, and he was always that barking chihuahua saying, hey, look over here, look at the immigrant community, look at these Latinos coming in from the South, look at the way they're getting treated. And he really ratcheted up when Donald Trump decided to run for office, and he hasn't turned it down. And so it is quite shocking to see somebody during kind of the beginning of this resistance, right, that's going on with the Democratic Party and these invisible groups, for him to kind of bow out. And a lot of analysis that I saw on TV and on radio was, well, what's his motive for leaving? He did mention that he wants to assist in building the infrastructure for the party, for the Democratic Party, ahead of the 2020 presidential election. So one individual kind of suspected that he's going to join Barack Obama's foundation and start organizing and stuff. But what have you heard from any contacts in this kind of Chicago area as to what he's going to do next?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because in a moment people are going to hear an interview that I had earlier this evening with Larry Gonzalez. Larry Gonzalez is known to many people listening to this podcast. He's one of the top Latino lobbyists and political operatives in D.C., but he's a Chicago guy. He knows Congressman Gutierrez very well, not only personally but politically, and some of these other players that you're going to hear about, like Chuy Garcia and others. So you'll hear that conversation in a moment, sort of deep dive into the Chi. But in terms of to answer your question, Leo, it's really interesting because unfortunately, people just can't sincerely do things, because the first thing you heard a couple of days ago, especially on social media, was if Luis Gutierrez is stepping down, that means there must be some skeletons that are about to come out, kind of related to this sex scandal. But
I mean, you can't be wrong either to think that either.
It crosses your mind. It crossed everybody's mind. You're right about that. There's no question. And then obviously he's sort of, I think we had to take him at his word. I think he's totally figured it out, but he definitely seems like he wants to spend some time with the rebuild effort on the island. He definitely wants to spend some time figuring out his own political future. I mean, the mayoral seat in Chicago, which I think is, look, if you're a every Chicagoan that's urban involved in politics, their dream is to be mayor of Chicago. It's one of the great political jobs in this country. So I think, sort of having Chuy Garcia potentially fill the void, the last Latino that ran a strong mayoral campaign a few years ago, sort of allowing him to step into his role. Maybe they potentially switch roles. And he even speculated today that running for president in 2020 is not out of the picture. There's been speculation he would move to Puerto Rico to run for governor. So, he has a lot of options. None of those sound particularly ridiculous or unreasonable. And I think it just speaks to the fact that, we oftentimes have to get out of our comfort zone, whether it's a sort of a job that you've done and you're doing, you're sort of a reliable job that maybe isn't that challenging but pays the bills, and forcing yourself to make a move to sort of stretch yourself, or in the case of Congressman Gutierrez, taking on a new challenge. So I'm going to take his word for it that he's really trying to figure it out. But I think wherever he falls, he's not going to go away. He's more popular than ever before. He's more beloved by Latinos, whether they're immigrant rights activists or Puerto Ricans, than ever before. And I don't think we would allow him to just retire. He's going to be a voice you're going to hear from for a long time.
Well, all I know is over here in Washington, I really do hope so. Especially in the Tri-Cities area, where you have over 2,000 DACA recipients here locally, when you need somebody there at the Capitol fighting for immigrant rights, fighting for our communities, which are underserved. Because really, I'm sorry to say, I don't know if the Democratic Party really believes in the progressive rhetoric that they are spouting right now. I will say that the Chuck and Nancy that we have now, that talking about immigration, talking about DACA students, is not the same Chuck and Nancy we saw back in 2010 or 2013 with the Gang of 8 bill. It's nice to have somebody in office that's always kind of, being that driving force to make sure that Latino or right issues are at the forefront. I think this is a big void. I don't know who's a part of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus that's going to step up. I don't know if it's Joaquin Castro or Mr. Gallito from Arizona. I mean, who do you think is going to step up?
Leo, that is a fantastic question. I'm glad you asked that question because, I think it is time for this new generation to step up. I think you brought up some great names. I think Congressman Gallego out of Arizona, who's, full disclosure, a friend and someone who I've known from his days running city council office in Phoenix, is definitely sort of starting to take the mantle of that sort of mouthpiece as it relates to sort of holding Donald Trump accountable, particularly with his background as a military veteran who's also a progressive. I think Congressman Ruben Kihuen, him along with Congressman Espaillat out of New York and Ruben Kihuen out of Las Vegas, are the first two members of Congress who were formerly undocumented, came here as young children, as young immigrants. So I think that there's an opportunity, particularly for Ruben, who's got a great profile, very bilingual, great personal story from the Southwest. I think has an opportunity to sort of help take on that mantle as sort of one of the leaders of the immigrant rights movement. We have Congresswoman Nanette Barragan, who's, I don't think she's found her issue yet, but, has a great profile, very young, represents some of the most well-recognized Latino communities and communities in general out of Los Angeles. So I think very talented. Dr. Raul Ruiz, who not only is a member of Congress but a medical doctor, but I believe on record as the Mexican American with the most degrees ever from Harvard University. But they have to step up. To your point, it took Congressman Gutierrez literally campaigning as a national figure for decades to get the kind of recognition and respect broadly from our community. So they're going to have to, on some level, balance their local responsibilities as local Congress people that have to take care of their district first with being, on some level, national figures and national leaders. So it's a great question. And I think it's time for that generation, as well as others who will be running for Congress this year, or running for other positions around the country, to step it up. So it'll be really interesting. And let's now hear, Leo, from a great friend and a great expert as it relates to Chicago politics and U.S. Latino politics, Larry Gonzalez, who's going to address some of those issues as well, and talk about Chuy Garcia, who was the candidate who's looking to take Congressman Gutierrez's place in the 4th Congressional District of Illinois, who Congressman Gutierrez endorsed during his announcement. So let's listen to Larry Gonzalez's commentary, and then we'll come back and talk about the budget and these other issues here on Ray's Talk Show.
Welcome back to Ray's Talk Show. This is your host, Ray Collazo. Thank you for downloading it, subscribing to the podcast. You know, anything, when big things, especially either political issues or Cubs baseball, anytime there's a real big Chicago-based headline, I always like to tap into my shy guy and get Larry back on the show. Larry Gonzalez, welcome back to Ray's Talk Show. And we had some big news come out of the North Side this week, my friend.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Good to be here again. Shy guy, I've never been described as that, but hopefully people understand it's the CHI, not the SHY.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Chicago politics, man, it's never dull. And, with the announcement of Congressman Luis Gutierrez after decades of representing Illinois' 4th Congressional District, announcing his retirement, and then immediately after announcing the endorsement of someone that he hopes will succeed him in that seat, Jesus Chuy Garcia, who has had a long history in politics as well in the city of Chicago, from being involved in the Harold Washington days. I don't know how many of your listeners may remember the city of Chicago's first African-American mayor. It was a big deal back then, and Chuy Garcia and Luis Gutierrez both kind of came up at the same time as young Latino leaders in the city of Chicago, and bringing them to the current day in Chicago politics. And so, yeah, it was a bit of an earth shaker.
Yeah, so let's start there, Larry. Take us back to, I guess, a day and a half ago when the news came out. What was your initial reactions? I know I was surprised just because how surprising it was. I mean, usually within our circles there's rumblings, there's rumors. And so I'm just curious, kind of just what was your initial reaction, and give people a sense of kind of the reactions of the Latino political community that we engage in.
Yeah, I actually, being a product of Chicago and having gotten my start, so to speak, in Chicago politics, I was a little surprised, but not all that surprised. You may recall that Congressman Gutierrez had contemplated retirement, maybe 8-10 years ago, and in fact announced his retirement from Congress, and then immediately took it back and decided to stay in the fight, specifically for the purpose of, wanting to see the immigration reform debate, policy debate, all the way through. And unfortunately, here we are nearly a decade later, and that still hasn't happened. And he has been always seen as a leader, particularly for the immigrant community, around those issues, but also now with the current policy debate around, the so-called Dreamers and DACA, the Deferred Action debate. So, yes, surprising, I think, to a lot. Not so surprising, maybe, from the political side, but not totally unexpected. I think there was a sense, and there have been rumblings a little bit in the Chicago political debate about how much longer he was going to go. I mean, he's still a relatively young man at 63, but
yeah.
the fact that his signature issue has been throughout his career the immigration reform debate. There was a level of frustration of not being able to bring that through the finish line. Not just him, of course, a lot of folks, but I think particularly he is singularly connected to the immigration reform movement.
Larry, and now it's and I'll ask you in a second your thoughts about where the congressman goes from here. Congressman Luis Gutierrez, of course, announcing about 2 days ago that he'll not be running re-election and endorsing a Chicago Politico, Chuy Garcia, who I believe is a county elected official now, but a long time, very well known political figure. Ran against Rahm Emanuel, had a good run recently for mayor, to endorse him to be a successor. And I'm talking to Larry Gonzalez about it, who knows his stuff about Chicago and all things politics around the country. You reference obviously his being Luis being a champion for immigration. You also are very aware, and our audience should be aware that the Puerto Rican community, particularly not just recently with what's happened with the island, but just historically, particularly when progressive Puerto Ricans in the mainland. He's had a similar sort of champion role. What do you see as, at least in this chapter, his era in Congress? What do you see as Congressman Gutierrez's legacy being as he departs Congress after all these 23 years? I think it'll be.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned earlier, I think no question his standing out for the rights of immigrants. I mean, there's an interesting note, particularly in some of the time I spent in Chicago politics. This was probably at least a decade ago when Luis himself commissioned a poll among Latinos, and you are aware of kind of the population. Yes, it's dominated or majority as far as Latinos in the city of Chicago are Mexican, but there's a very significant Puerto Rican population. But it was an interesting finding. I think this was the early moments when Luis had pondered running for mayor of Chicago, found that, in fact, his approval rating among the Mexicans and the Mexican community was like 90% plus. It was much lower among Puerto Ricans, interestingly, but he was such a champion on immigration. When you turn on Univision and Telemundo in relation to immigration debate in Washington, there was Luis each and every night standing up for immigrant rights. So without question that, but you hit the nail on the head when you talk about also a champion for Puerto Ricans throughout the United States, but particularly on the island and the plight that they have suffered more recently and throughout really the decades of his tenure in Washington. And that will be a tough void to fill. While we do have some other champions in Congress like Nydia Velázquez out of New York, and a newer one has emerged, Darren Soto out of Orlando, Florida, and Jose Serrano, and a number of others. I think, Luis's voice has always been very strong in supporting the people of Puerto Rico, but also in the United States, and Puerto Ricans in the United States as well. So, very tough void to fill that Jesus Garcia, may or may not. It's by no means is Jesus Chuy Garcia's election a slam dunk. I mean, he will have the benefit of having very large name recognition by having run, as you mentioned, for mayor in 2015, and really gave current mayor Rahm Emanuel a very heavy competitive challenge that took him to a runoff in the city of Chicago, which had not been seen for nearly 30 years. Lost in the general election. We've got kind of buried under an avalanche of campaign dollars, which Mayor Emanuel was able to raise over $30 million for the race, while Chuy Garcia could only raise about $5 million, but still was very competitive, even within that lopsided number of dollars that Mayor Emanuel had. So,
what you remember from the Senate primary when a young state senator ran for U.S. Senate, State Senator Barack Obama, Gutierrez didn't endorse the winning candidate in that one. So it doesn't, he doesn't bat 1,000 with these things. But obviously, Chuy's a very strong candidate. But you're right, and it was interesting because and we'll talk about this in the next segment of the show. But I believe the first female candidate has thrown a hat in the ring. So in Florida is. So there's definitely a field there, and it'll be interesting. We have time to talk about that primary, which I believe will be in March. There's lots of speculation. I think it's safe to say that a lot of people, besides feeling sad and knowing that the void that'll be there amongst the Latino congressional delegation with Luis Gutierrez's departure. There's a lot of speculation about why he's doing. Is there some scandal coming? Is he running for governor of Puerto Rico? Is he running for mayor of Chicago? Is he sick? There was all sorts of speculation. He sort of is, as spoken about, definitely wanting to spend a significant part of the next phase of his career, supporting the rebuild of the island. But he's not today. Hey, I don't have a lawyer yet, even, but to develop an exploratory committee. But I wouldn't even rule out running for president in 2020, which would be very interesting. Let me ask you the question this way, Larry. What do you think Congressman Gutierrez should do? What do you think he should do?
Well, I don't know if you realize he just hired me as a spiritual advisor, but
exactly. Well,
no, I kid. I mean, for someone like myself to tell him what he should do, I think where is the most well known, as we've already discussed. His ability to reach the immigrant community and have a level of credibility that transcends, I would argue, anyone in the United States. I mean, when, even places like Univision and Telemundo do surveys, and Luis Gutierrez appears in the top 5 of the most well-known people in the country, including celebrities. How do you use that celebrity? And I think, as he talked about during his retirement announcement, I think he's going to continue to be engaged in this debate. I mean, he talked about, look, there's immigrants on the verge of being engaged politically in this country, everywhere, Michigan, Ohio, in places that we don't talk about, and those are the places he's going to go. Yes, Puerto Rico is going to be part of that equation. I don't think there's any question about that. It's in his heart. But, in addition, he has the ability to walk into these immigrant communities and connect with those communities, and his message of being politically engaged, particularly in a very polarizing time with a very polarizing figure in the White House, is going to be very, very important.
I think one of the things that this is really going to be a test and a challenge, not just for the congressman, but for all of us in our community, in our leadership space, is that, one of the reasons I think people are so fearful of him departing Congress is that we typically haven't had other platforms for Latino icons, once they leave leading an organization or that they founded or being elected, sort of the height of their political career. A lot of our elders have struggled with sort of being able to reinvent themselves for that second act to actually have a bigger platform, or at least a comparable one. So right. I think Congressman Gutierrez is cognizant of that, and what I like about his posture as he's announced this is that he's making it very clear, I'm not retiring. I'm simply moving on and going to be doing this in another way. And I think, look, the reality is, as much as he's moved the ball as it relates to, pushing for immigration reform in particular. There's been other issues, but the one he's most known for, Congress moves very, very, very slowly. He's been there over 20 years, and we still haven't gotten to that point legislatively. But as we all know, outside of Congress, there's no reason why he couldn't even have much more influence. So
that's right.
Some ways this will free him up from constantly having to raise money.
You could easily make that argument that, in fact, you can be more effective than the Congress can once you get outside of the constraints of worrying about, your next election.
That's right. And Larry, just a little bit more about Chuy Garcia. Of course, there'll be other candidates and we'll have time to discuss it. It's interesting how, he potentially moves up, and there's discussions that Alderman Munoz will run for his county seat. A buddy of mine who my name was would likely be tapped to run for Alderman in Munoz's district. But a little bit about Chuy and what do you think will be a factor or some of the things to look out for that folks will be engaged in with that primary? Because it will be interesting.
Yeah, I think it is important for your listeners to understand, Chuy Garcia's background. I think particularly in a dynamic of a city like Chicago, where you do have this, I guess I'll use the term dominant in relation to the Mexican community, but only in terms of the numbers. I think, in terms of political power, the Mexican community is not necessarily there. In fact, there are a number of Puerto Rican elected officials in comparison to the numbers. But that said, I think, Chuy has shown an ability to connect to both communities throughout his tenure as a public servant, for the last 2 decades, and I think he'll continue that. I'd be hard-pressed to think of someone else that Luis Gutierrez could have chosen as his successor, and ultimately, obviously, it's going to be up to the voters to do that, but chosen to embrace as his potential successor, knowing Chuy's ability to transcend, sort of the Mexican label or the Puerto Rican label, and to be sure each community has its own particular issues when it comes to the city. But I think he's going to do an amazing job. He has served as state senator. I mentioned earlier that he served as a city council member during the Harold Washington era back in the 90s, has moved up throughout those ranks, became a senator in the mid-90s when, in fact, I worked for him as a legislative aide, and worked in the state capitol in Springfield, Illinois, until he actually lost in 1998, lost his seat. Kind of took a step back after that and reassessed, what he wanted to do, and got back to his grassroots level and ran a economic development and affordable housing corporation, the Little Village Development Corporation. So really got back to the grassroots of things, and also continued his own personal education and was able to obtain a higher education degree, got his master's degree, and then was really, because of his popularity even then, although he had lost in 1998, people urged him to run, and a seat came open on the Cook County Board of Commissioners. People may know or not know that Cook County, in fact, is the second largest county in the nation. And so these commissioners are single-member districts, and many of the districts are even larger than congressional districts. So they represent a lot of people. Congressional districts are, about 750,000 residents or so. So he's able to get his name out there and do a great job during his time as Cook County Board Commissioner, and then had continued to build, political goodwill throughout the city. And when this opportunity came to run and offer a challenge to Rahm Emanuel, the mayor of the city of Chicago, he took it. He did an amazing job with very little money, had a lot of support, and, surprised a lot of people. But at the end of the day, it wasn't able to go all the way, and people were anticipating an additional run again in 2019. The city of Chicago is suffering from a lot of maladies, but particularly the murder rate has gone up, and a number of issues like many urban areas. So Rahm is not, his approval rating has been in the dumps. So I think that people had anticipated Chewy would run again, and so there's some level of disappointment saying, this gets him out of the way. Who will run against Rahm? But at this point, I think, Chewy's going to focus on what he can bring to Congress and trying to fill that void of leadership that is left by Luis Gutierrez's retirement. So, decades of experience, I think he'll be bringing to Washington.
Absolutely. And I remember starting to do work with Dr. Juan Andrade and our friends Rudy Lopez from USHLI, and, Rudy sitting down with me explaining that history. That's when he was running that organization on the South Side, and following his career since then, and I think the mayoral run not only gave him, I think, expanded kind of his reach, into even beyond the Latino community. Obviously the issue with the very late releasing of that videotape of the police officer shooting Laquan McDonald, I believe it was, and so that was a mobilizing opportunity for Chewy and the African American community, in progressive circles. I think he gained a lot of attention in a lot of those circles as well during that election. So, he's been in the spotlight. He certainly is up for the challenge. There's other notable candidates. So again, we'll have time to talk about it. Larry, as we wrap this up, anything else on your mind, and let people know where they can find you on social media to keep talking all things politics?
Yeah, they can find me on Twitter at really two locations. I have my own, but I also run one for the firm I work for. One is at Latin Strategies. That's LATIN Strategies on Twitter. And then I'm also, my personal Twitter is at LGTRG. And then I'm also on Facebook, but I do most of my political speculation on Twitter. So it should be an interesting, I think, 3 months. And you mentioned a couple of the names that are going to run. Right now, there have been at least 5 different names that have been bandied about in the media that will run for the congressional seat. It remains to be seen who can make the mad dash to the actually filing of the signature of the petition by next Tuesday, December 5th. So it's a very short period here to get to actually get your name on the ballot. We'll probably, perhaps, maybe be having a different conversation after December 5th, but right now it looks like there'll be at least 5 candidates in the race.
That's a good point. And Larry, for those that don't know, a new daddy, so congratulations to you and the family. And
thank you.
Appreciate your time and enjoy the holidays, brother. And before you know it, it'll be spring training again, and we'll be talking baseball again. Cubs made a nice run this year.
They
got the stick of Nationals out of the way for us, which was, as a Phillies fan, I was happy to see. All the best to your brother.
Unfortunately, that series took everything out of us. We had nothing left for the.
That is the truth.
The Dodgers.
God, what a way to! I mean, that was a 12-11 and 10 innings and freezing cold weather. You had to really gut it out that series. It was incredible. But Larry, all the best, brother. We'll be in touch soon. Thanks for your thoughts.
Thanks so much.
Welcome back. Thank you again, Larry, for your commentary, and congratulations to the baby. Leo, we're in the 11th hour, it appears, on this tax debate, and it's not looking pretty, brother. So I know that you're, anytime we talk taxes, we all get kind of jittery.
Just a little bit, just to tell the people out there, maybe there's some people who are sleeping under a rock. Yes, that the tax bill out of the Senate did come out of Budget Committee yesterday on really a kind of a party line vote, 12-11. It supposedly could have been up to a vote here on the floor as of early as today, but nothing has. I'm looking up the news right now, CNN. Nothing's came up yet, but don't put it past those guys over there in Washington. What are you hearing from people around? You said you're going to be there in D.C. in 13 hours. I don't like. I'll say it again. I don't see this bill coming out of the Senate, passing the Senate. I just don't. It's just too complex. There's too many problems. I don't think Don has the negotiating skills that he always touts. I just don't see it coming through. There's just too much stuff. And really, at the end of the day, when you have CBO scores coming out saying this is going to add almost $1 to federal to the deficit and to the federal budget, I just don't. And I'm blowing.
Well, your lips to God's ears, brother. So, as you said, the Senate bill, tax bill, has gotten out of the committee. They passed their House bill last week, and it's as crappy as you would ever imagine. We're talking about over $1.5 trillion in tax cuts, which on paper sounds nice, but then you get into the numbers and realize the overwhelming majority of that money would go to the richest 1% of our society, and some of us would get either a minimal, working middle class Americans would either receive sort of a minimal tax break or a tax increase because of these some other factors as it relates to depending on what state you live in and other factors that they're squeezing into this very complicated bill. One thing this certainly doesn't do is make the tax code any simpler. It actually makes it much more complicated. But nevertheless, this disastrous tax bill will lead to budget cuts that will impact all kind of working people, from people that are receiving housing subsidies to Medicaid, Medicare. People are going to lose their health care if the Senate bill ultimately gets passed. It's just bad news all overall. The reason that I'm probably not as optimistic as I was even a week ago, and probably where you're at right now, Leo, is the overwhelming power and influence that these donors have, much more so than Donald Trump has on these Republican senators, frankly, on this issue, because they're the ones that benefit the most. The Sheldon Adelsons, the Steve Winns, some of the Koch brothers, some of the people that really sort of fuel the Republican Party at this point. And the Paul Ryans of the world and those characters are the ones that are really pushing these people to do this, because it's certainly not for the good of the country. So, when people say, oh, they just want to be able to let people know they have something on the board, well, they're not going to be able to campaign on this next year because it's absolutely horrible for working people. So they just literally are trying to assuage a very small group of Republican elites, so they could keep their coffers healthy, and even if they lose their seats eventually, they'll be sitting pretty financially. So it's very bad news. We encourage everyone to call their senators, particularly if you have a Republican senator in your state. Call them, harass them, tag them on social media, email them, because we just need. The good news is that we only need 3 votes, no votes in the Republican caucus. Susan Collins, I have a hard time believing with the Obamacare mandate that's in the current Senate bill. She'll ultimately vote for it. Murkowski's shaky. You're hoping that we can still get Flake and Corker, even under the guise of fiscal responsibility, because it certainly is a budget buster and a deficit buster. that they'll stick to their principles. McCain, of course, is a wild card. Rand Paul, a few others have expressed concerns. It's coming down to the 11th hour. That's very complicated. There's small business implications. There's implications for people that live in states, very blue states like California and New York and New Jersey. But we have to have our voice heard here because even if they vote for this bill and get it out of the Senate this week, they still will have to essentially negotiate a compromise bill with the House bill. So we still have some time, but we're running out of time. So it's real important we have our voice heard now because this tax legislation could impact our economy and our wallets for a generation.
Yeah, I'm all in favor of tax reform. The tax code is over 70,000 pages. I'm all for that. But this bill it's not only bad for America, it's bad for business, it's bad for our families. And I'm glad that our two senators are Democrat going to be voting against this bill over here in the Senate. We have a couple Republican senators over here in Washington State that are going to vote for it over there in the House. But I want to play a hypothetical game with you real quick about this tax plan, and because really the Republicans are looking for a genuine major kind of legislative victory to end the year, right? What was Donald Trump saying? A nice Christmas gift for America, the tax bill. Do you think if they don't pass anything by the end of the year,
it's really interesting
his
because
presidency is even
it's hard to
trouble?
really. I think the short answer is no, only because for the people that somehow are not turned off by all the other nonsense and utter chaos that has taken over our political and really our society to a large degree because of this man, I don't think not passing another bad bill it really makes a difference. I think it puts the onus on members of Congress, though. So I don't think it necessarily impacts Trump because he's not getting anything done anyway. But I certainly think it could impact members of Congress. But I think the reality is that it actually will be worse for them politically if they pass this, because that'll give not so much the Democratic Party, because they're not in the best of shape, but it'll give the American public time to really understand what was just passed and sort of the ramifications to their pocketbooks and their local economies. So I think that Republicans could lose the House if this were to pass, because this is going to impact particularly blue state Republicans in districts like in Central California and upstate New York, and suburban Chicago, suburban Philadelphia. Those Republicans that, would really, whose constituencies would get impacted the most negatively by this bill. So, so I think that, I don't think it impacts, frankly, Trump, because at this point, if you haven't been turned off to him by now, you're probably sort of lost anyway. But I definitely think it impacts, I think, even more negatively if it actually passes, ultimately, the Republicans in Congress.
Yeah, I want to say that President Donald Trump's going to be on the ropes if they don't get some type of tax reform done, or really anything done. I mean, kind of in the backdrop is this government shutdown that could happen in the next week or so if they don't agree on a resolution. Even with that.
Well, but I'm going to push back. I'm going to push back on that, Leo, and this is why. And again, I hear what you're saying. I think you're looking at this from a logical perspective. And I just really believe in my heart that either the people that are still with Trump, who, quite honestly, if they were to come out in large numbers, could still sort of preserve Republican majorities in the House and Senate, depending on, the states and the districts, are either sort of brainwashed by the Republican propaganda machine in the media, or legislation. You're not turning to Donald Trump for logical legislation. You're turning for Donald Trump for, quite honestly, a sense of protectionism, a sense of kind of getting back at the system, a sense of slowing down progress that you feel is not benefiting you personally. The racial sentiments, the sort of cultural sentiments that, quite honestly, if you're in that position, you're winning every day. I mean, Native Americans, even in a moment where they're being honored for their bravery as U.S. military veterans get insulted on national television and throughout the world. You're seeing, you're seeing African Americans and Latinos ridiculed by this president day to day in petty squabbles. You're seeing more immigrants being deported. You're seeing, more Muslims, being demonized. So, on some level, if that's your mentality and that's kind of what you're in this ride for, as embarrassing and chaotic and harmful it is for the country overall, you getting from him what you want. You're not here you didn't sign up for sound policy movement. You signed up for a pushback to the progress of the world that you feel is not benefiting you in some level, and you feel that resentment. I mean, the fact that there's still people supporting Roy Moore in Alabama, I think that's all you need to know about. This is not logical political calculating that's going on with unfortunately, too many Americans.
It definitely is, and I'm glad you pushed back on that. I love having these conversations. It's definitely tribalism at its finest, and I think I want to be logical because we live in really in a logical time right now, where there is no such thing as.
I know, brother, because you're a good guy and you believe everyone's everybody's got a good heart, and I know I'm a good guy too. I'm just seeing what's going on. And, I think we have to just remember, let's go back to almost a year and a half ago when that man came down an escalator and literally the first thing out of his mouth was they're bringing Mexican rapists and killers to this country. And that turbocharged his candidacy. It didn't kill it. So I think that gives you an insight. And I hate to, I'm not perfect, and I've supported elected officials that were crummy in their personal lives and had faults for sure. Mm-hmm. But I certainly wouldn't support anybody that felt like that about another group of people. So, and made that the central part of their candidacy. So, we do have to kind of, from even a moral perspective, kind of look in the mirror here as a society and quite honestly hold our friends and neighbors accountable. I don't think so much you and I, Leo, because most of our folks aren't in that boat. But unfortunately, a lot of our communities, it's literally, if not the majority, a lot of people are in that mindset. So it's a challenge. There's no question. I think on some level, it's kind of beyond politics even. It's about kind of the moral and ethical compass of this country.
Yeah, I mean, I lost for words. I'm trying to believe that over there in Alabama, those individuals are going to do the right thing. Now that race has become tighter, and there are actually some polling that says that Roy Moore may even be up. I guess as time goes by, people forget a lot of things that he has been accused of. But I just kind of hope that with perhaps, back to Mr. Luis Gutierrez, maybe he's going to be that outside force to kind of steer this ship back to those days of progress that we had during the Obama administration. Because I really do felt like there was a lot of progress made during that time, and we just went back. And we're starting to go back, and America's starting to be, America can be ugly, and I think it's getting back to that point with this presidency. Almost every single day. I mean, the other day it's calling Elizabeth Warren Pocahontas. Today it's retweeting right-wing conspiracy theorists. When does it stop? And when do normal people like myself and you and the people down there in the Capitol and over here in my state stand up and say enough's enough and start, like you're saying, you like you earlier, you're trying to say, Leo, this is reality. You're trying to be a good guy, an idealist. When do these people wake up and see what they voted in?
That is the question, brother. So, while some of us are lost in the wilderness, the rest of us have to organize, have to vote, have to register our folks. If you know anybody, I'm going to call out a good friend of mine in Alabama, Felix Montelara. Don Felix, por favor, brother. We need you to mobilize your friends, your neighbors. I know you and your wife, that's 2 votes right there. You got a church, you got neighbors. I don't know where all that politically, but find the people that want to do the right thing here. Come out to vote in a low turnout election. Even a strong, a strong turnout by the African American community would make a huge difference. That's certainly, I'd like to get down there. If I went down there, I'd love to do a little door knocking in some of those African American communities in Mobile and Montgomery and just kind of see where their sense is, because that's a big part of the electorate that's forgotten about down there. But anyway, if you know anybody in Alabama, reach out to them. They're on a military base. They're going to grad school, whatever reason they happen to be in that fine state. They got to come out to vote. It's so important. That one Senate vote could change a lot of things going into next year. That's another reason why they want to move on this quickly, Leo, because even if they gave themselves another 30 days right after Christmas, they may have one less vote in the mix. So this is an important time. So you listen to Leo Perales and Ray Collazo on Ray's Talk Show, talking about the issues that you care about from our perspective, and thank Leo for his leadership. You can again find us on iTunes, Stitcher, anywhere you can download a podcast. Ray's Talk Show. Leo, remind people where they can find the Perales Report.
You can find me on YouTube. You can find me on the gram. That's Instagram for all you old folks out there. I'm kidding. You can also find me on Twitter. You can find me everywhere. Just type in, search the Perales Report. I come right up. I'm not I don't think I'm the most famous Perales, but I'm working my way towards that. I want to be one of the go-to guys.
You're definitely in the top of the Leo Peraleses. There's no question about that. And I just remembered, because I short shifted her the other day. Nina Perales was the lawyer. I was trying to think of her name, who is MALDEF's leads, I think, the Texas operation for MALDEF. She's one of the great civil rights lawyers of our time. Has done a tremendous amount of work for Latino voting rights and other civil rights issues down in Texas. So, and the daughter of Cesar Perales, another legendary Latino civil rights lawyer. So Nina Perales was the other Perales I wanted to shout out the other day. Real quick on Puerto Rico, we still got literally over 1 million people on the island without electricity. Huge chunk of people without running water. Still ice pockets of the island. There's challenges just getting a hot meal, getting some of the basic necessities. So we're still dealing with a tremendous humanitarian crisis. We've seen, even in this last week, another report of some malfeasance as it relates to oversight of this crisis. There was a company which literally was a P.O. box in some guy's basement, with, basically a shell company that was given a $30 million contract to provide tarps to people on the island whose roofs have been damaged. And after a month, they hadn't produced one single tarp, and the contract was voided. But this is speaking to some of the challenges that people are facing. So much respect for people like the chef, Jose Andres, and others who have fed more people than FEMA, probably. So this challenge isn't going away. We have to be diligent on it. Some good news: Senator Bernie Sanders and others like Senator Warren and our friend Congressman Darren Soto announced a Marshall Plan for the island, a $140 billion proposal to not only deal with the short-term humanitarian crisis, but address the larger structural economic issues facing the island. Shout out to our homeboy Jeff Cruz that works in Senator Sanders' office. I'll actually put a picture out on Facebook, Leo, so you can check out Jeff, a great advocate and friend, another Chicago guy. So, we still have to fight the good fight, and we have to figure out, Leo, how this issue can stay in the news, because that's going to be our challenge, right? Keeping this top of mind for the general public.
Yeah, because it will tend to get lost. I mean, you have a president who he just tweets, and then all of a sudden it's on every channel. It's crazy. But I want you to speak to, you were hanging out with big celebrities a week ago and stuff like that. What was up with that? All over the internet and.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, so that's right. I almost forgot my little run-in. So, what Leo's referring to, and I want to give a shout-out to Evelyn Mejil. Evelyn was the organizer, or the principal organizer. There was many people, but she was it was the brainchild of Evelyn. There was a Unity March for Puerto Rico a few Sundays ago, which I was honored to represent my organization, Unidos US, and of course the Ray's Talk Show community as not only one of the marchers but one of the speakers. I got to speak on behalf of Unidos US during the ceremony. Congressman Gutierrez was there, many other Rita Moreno, many other dignitaries. But what Leo's referring to is the fact that it's a long story, but essentially I ended up during the march, by sheer luck and circumstance and timing, actually holding a banner that was promoting the march, and I turned to my left and I realized I'm marching with Lin-Manuel Miranda, of course, the iconic head of producer, champion of Broadway, of course, the creator of Hamilton and the In the Heights musical franchises. And so it was unbelievable. It was pretty amazing. And, to be able to just walk with him and see him interact with fans, interact with political figures, for a half hour or so, was an incredible honor. He was very gracious. I didn't speak to him much, but, it was, I did get some video and in pictures, which I've been happy to share with people on social media. And actually what Leo specifically is referring to is the fact that the NBC News picture of Lin-Manuel's presence at the march included me in the picture, and then he proceeded to tweet out that picture. So that picture itself went viral, and I just happened to be a guy in the corner in it. But so it was something, brother. But quite a time. Let me tell you something, Leo. Hanging out with 10,000 Puerto Ricans is always a lot of fun. But when you're in a group of people, like-minded people, and they weren't all Puerto Rican, of course, but people of that mentality who have that kind of spirit, it's just always a lot of fun, and it was very uplifting, and it was great to see so many friends and family, including my brother Michael Collazo, and just other friends and allies and people that I've never even met that I've become friendly with on social media. Meeting them in person, the great advocacy they're doing, whether it's in Boston or Newark, New Jersey, or Orlando or Chicago or the Southwest. So it was a lot of fun. But yeah, Lin-Manuel, brother, don't get to hang out with big ballers like that all the time. It was a treat.
Yeah, that was really awesome. I was jealous, but again, I think my jaw dropped, to be honest, because I love him. I loved him when he was on SNL. Loved Hamilton. And, he's just done so much great work. He's been really a hero and inspiration to many Latinos, especially Puerto Ricans out there. I just couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe how much really publicity that event got, because sometimes you have events and then no one covers it. But that event was everywhere. I mean, it was on PBS NewsHour. I mean, it's been crazy.
Let me ask you a question, Leo. When you saw that on social media, what did you think? When you saw that video, and I'm literally standing right next to him, I didn't even realize I was that close to him. But that one video, I'm like, what did you think when you saw your co-host, your podcast buddy, standing right next to Lin-Manuel Miranda while he's singing "Que Bonita Bandera"? That must have been, I would imagine that was quite a moment for you, 3,000 miles away. A little surprise.
Yeah, right off the bat, when you go online and you have certain expectations. I mean, you expect to be connected to whatever website you want, and you expect that your cable or phone company isn't messing with the data and is connecting you to all the websites and all that. That's what you call net neutrality, and this has been a really big issue. How's this going to end with this net neutrality issue right now in the Trump presidency?
Sure. Well, Lin-Manuel helped. Yeah, Lin-Manuel helped a lot with that. Yeah. No, well, Lin-Manuel is, with the media, he's such a darling, with the East Coast media, that sort of New York, DC, network. Jimmy Fallon, the whole thing. He really has quite a network, and that got it was
right.
It was quite a moment. It was a good time, and I was not necessarily on the slate to speak, but my job was gracious enough to allow me to say a few words, so that was nice. And so I'm sure we'll have him on the show. People ask me, so well, why didn't you talk to him more? Why didn't you, do this and that? I said, well, look, how I look at it is it's the first of many collaborations between Ray Collazo and Lin-Manuel Miranda. So I think one day we'll look back and say, wow, that was the beginning. That's how I look at it. But let's get into Leo, the Hey Ray segment, always a favorite here on Ray's Talk Show. I know you've got a few quick ones we wanted to chat about real quick.
Anyways, President Trump slammed Elizabeth Warren, calling her Pocahontas at a Navajo Code Talkers event where these heroes were being honored. Why does Trump always seem to go for those racial type of slurs?
Well, I mean, so the FCC, which handles, sort of these sorts of issues, as it relates to mass communications in this country, announced that the net neutrality rules that were implemented during the Obama administration would essentially be repealed. Now they're having the committee has to meet and vote on this in a few weeks, and so as people recall, getting net neutrality passed, even during the Obama administration, which is a relatively progressive administration, took a lot of advocacy because obviously the major telecommunications and phone companies and web internet-based companies would not like to be regulated. So why would Amazon why would Amazon want a platform that they don't own to have the same kind of high speed or equal speed as their web platform? So, there's lots of games that these different companies could play if these rules are to be loosened that could honestly not only literally slow down your access to the kind of information you want online, but honestly create fees depending on how you were able to access a web platform or a service or an app. So there's lots of potential consequences to this. I think we can fight. They've already gotten a lot of pushback from progressive activists, and we're actually going to have a Latina blogger, a Latina who's been really engaged in this issue on the advocacy side, Danae Escavarino, who's agreed to be on the show next week. So we're going to take a deeper dive on this next week, Leo, but obviously of great concern and certainly not good news for podcasters, that's for sure.
Yeah, it was definitely an uncomfortable moment. Did you see the face of one of the gentlemen when he said that? His eyes just got, oh my gosh, okay. Anyways, let's move on. Sexual abuse, sexual harassment has been a really big issue in the last couple weeks. Just like today, Matt Lauer was fired this morning from NBC amid sexual assault allegations. But this issue has also rocked Capitol Hill. Should embattled representatives, especially those who have been alleged to have sexually assaulted or harassed staffers, or really just anybody, should they step down from their posts, Democrat or Republican?
Well, we talked about it earlier. First of all, he's a disgusting human being. And second of all, and for anyone that thinks that, his press secretary had believed anything she said the other day, saying that it was not a racial slur is an idiot. And so you need to wake up and look in the mirror and see what's wrong with you. But the reality is, we talked about this earlier. It's the people that too many, I'm not saying all, but too many of the people that are Trump supporters, still Trump supporters, even after all this nonsense, they believe they're winning because they're on some level, in a very sick way, being sort of validated for their racist views, their very closed-minded views. Because even in this moment of when you're honoring, this group of Native American U.S. military veterans who did so much for this country, you talk about people who are over, getting over grievances for the good of the country and the good of their community. Very legitimate grievances, and have such a positive outlook on life, and we're willing to be on stage with President Trump, even looking past all of that, with the pipeline in South Dakota and everything else, for them to be insulted in front of him, that's, all he has left is hate. He has no policies. He has nothing positive to share. He has no ideas to improve people's conditions. He's not going to bring the jobs back, the old plant, that old nonsense. He's going to raise the taxes on the miners. I just saw that report this afternoon. So he has nothing left to sell his base but hate. So he's just going to keep doing it. He's going to keep doing it. He's going to keep doing it.
I think there's going to be a backlash from this. I mean, you saw it in the 90s. You're going to see it now. Next year, 2018, is going to be the year of the women. They are going to be running in for governorships, senator spots. This is going to come back to bite people because I don't know if you saw Nancy Pelosi this past weekend when they asked her flat out, "Do you think Representative Conyers should step down?" She kind of hesitated and said, "Well, he's just going to step down from his spot." So on both aisles, I think both political parties are not handling this well right now. And it's going to come back to hurt them both, especially in regards to women. That is just my piece on it. And lastly, Seahawks-Eagles play this Sunday, 5:30. I can tell you who wins. Seahawks. Legion of Boom. Sorry, you're not.
Yeah, it's really interesting. This is this could be on some level the biggest issue that came out this week, Leo, because if we could move in the direction where we could really take a positive step forward, so that women across all sectors, not just, these upper class media professionals or Hollywood executives or, political figures, for women across the board, because the women I get concerned about are those that are those single moms that are working at Target and working as hairstylists and just, are working in any sort of environment day to day just to survive, that are getting harassed, on some level assaulted. And they have to make a choice between, being able to put food on their table or quitting this job that's terrorizing them. Those are the kind of women that we have to ultimately support, and be able to create a culture of safety for women in the workplace in all sectors. But as it is to elected officials, we have to hold everyone accountable and, strike that balance between, really address being thoughtful and I don't want to say fair, but being thoughtful about, these cases on a case by case basis. Obviously, assaulting women and touching them is different than maybe glances or innuendo. And, and I'm not referring to any specific issue, but it's pretty clear that certainly a Roy Moore should not be in the U.S. Senate. He should be in jail. It's also pretty clear that, Representative Conyers needs to go home. He is not of right mind. And Matt Lauer, I think it's going to get really ugly because there's a lot more coming out on that one. Obviously the one that we're all sort of trying to figure out how to feel about it is Senator Franken. Senator Franken has generally a real good reputation as a progressive champion. He obviously effed up on this one big time. And, there's just trying to sort out, what sort of what's the punishment that fits the crime is, I think is an honest challenge for all of us, but we've just got to be better. We've got to hold ourselves accountable. We've got to break these cultures in many sectors of this being sort of commonplace. And one of the things that's going to resolve it is we have to empower women to break the glass, to allow them to break these glass ceilings and have their rightful place in leadership in these corporations and these government entities. Because if you've got 58 women in the Senate and you've got 280 women in Congress, and you've got women, leading most of the cabinet agencies and a woman president, a lot less is going to go on politics. That's the bottom line.
I can do that. My brother's an Eagles fan, oddly. So we're going to be going at it on Sunday, but it's
Legion of Boom. Legion of Boom's retired, bro. They put out the pasture. I think they're all hurt, aren't they? Is it Sherman Chancellor, who I love? I mean, I love the Cam Chancellor, one of my favorite NFL players. Let me tell you something. This is the biggest. I think you guys started as, I think you're over 4-point underdogs in Vegas, which doesn't necessarily mean anything, but the fact that you haven't been this big an underdog at home for, 7 years, speaks to not only how banged up you all are, but also just how well the Eagles are playing. I haven't talked about it much on the show, but this Eagle team is the truth. We've got the next young, great quarterback, Carson Wentz. But just as importantly, we've got a very good overall team. I don't know if you've seen the chemistry on this team's unbelievable. They baptize each other and pools when they're traveling. They've got this great spiritual base. They're fun loving. I don't know if they do the electric slide and they do all these cool little team dances, which I absolutely think is awesome. So it's going to be a great game, Leo, but we need to come up with a bet because, and straight up, forget the point spreads and all that. Winner takes all. So I'm just wondering, what would be a good bet, Leo? What do you think? Where are the other teams' jersey? Why don't we do that? Why don't we, the loser of the game Sunday's got to wear some sort of paraphernalia and take a picture of it and tweet it out on social media of the other. Interesting. Oh, he's a great American. Absolutely. Yeah, I may have. Yeah, I may have a Mariner cap. It may not be a Seahawk thing, but I'll rock something Seattle. I'll find a Mariner cap or something. But yeah, well, I think that'd be a fun bet. That's reasonable. Hey, brother. Yeah, in the summer when I go visit you. It ain't going to be Monday, brother. It'll be a good game. Russell Wilson's a good guy, good team, and we appreciate everyone listening to Ray's Talk Show. Again, this is your host, Ray Collazo, talking all things politics, everything else going on in our society, and our perspective on it, because we don't hear it nearly enough, and hopefully with the retirement or the next phase in Congressman Gutierrez's career, he'll have a bigger platform to share his perspective, not only with Latinos, but all Americans. Leo, let people know where they can find you on social media.
You can find me on Facebook, SoundCloud, Twitter, and Instagram. Just type in the Perales Report. I come right up. Lots of good stuff coming at you guys. 2018 is right around the corner. I know people are like, Leo, calm down. We just got off an election this year. I go, but guess what? 2018, those are the sexy races. In the even number years, those are the good ones a lot of people pay attention to.
No, definitely. And we definitely have to get back to talking more about DACA. That's going to heat up next week. And, I've got a special guest we're going to schedule. And this special guest was sharing with me that your Congressman Newhouse is actually very important in the debate as one of the moderate Republicans that appears to be looking to be helpful, pushing bipartisan legislation through the House. So you're going to be so this person asked me if we had any connections out there. I said, well, it's interesting you say that, because I've got the main man, Leo Perales. So we may be collaborating on that end of it. And, DACA is very important, and that's something we'll be talking more about in next week's episode. Again, thank you for listening to Ray's Talk Show. Check us out. And Ray's Talk Show, Ray's Podcast, anywhere you can download a podcast, iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, TuneIn, YouTube, the list goes on and on. And check us out on social media at Ray's Podcast. Leo, I would say enjoy the game, but I wouldn't really be meaning it. But certainly enjoy the rest of your weekend before Sunday night. And awesome. I look forward to talking to you next week.